we're all even. And unfortunately, human beings, out of our insecurities, oh, look at me, I'm your boss, I can make you do all of these things, and that makes me your superior. And no, it doesn't. It just makes you my boss. Right? And in terms of this company, I just simply need to be obedient and do what it is that you need me to do to make the company a success. But from a larger point of view, the spiritual journey is we want to make the world a success, because we're all part of the same family. We're not in different tribes, despite how many different ways people try to find ways to, oh, your skin color's different, you grew up in a different country, you believe differently. Yeah, no, that's not the way it's supposed to go.
Welcome to this episode of Help Me Understand with Dr. Thomas Jeffrey. Today, my guest is Dr. Eric Bruns, and we're going to be discussing the spiritual journey. Dr. Bruns earned a Doctor of Psychology degree from Spalding University and is also a licensed psychologist. He's a member of the Kentucky Psychological Association, the American Association of Christian Counselors, and the Society of Christian Psychology. Besides being instrumental in helping students prepare for their careers or going on to graduate school, Dr. Bruns enjoys working at Campbellsville University because he feels empowered to share his Christian faith. Beyond academia, he maintains a small clinical counseling practice in which he takes a humanistic, existential approach to helping individuals that need help finding their way back to a path of effective living. Thank you for joining me today.
Man, I knew that bio would come in handy sooner or later.
Now, and I didn't have to write it all,
right,
so that's the good part. Before getting into the topic of spiritual journey, I was intrigued by your use of humanistic existential, humanistic existential methodologies to help individuals find their way, their path.
Yeah.
What does that mean conceptually, and what does it look like in practice?
So, in the realm of counseling and therapy, there are some worldviews that we're exposed to through our training, and it's to try to help us understand the human being that's going to come through the door and see us. Because every human being has a story. Every human being has a journey that has gotten them to where, hey, I need some help. I've heard about you. Can you see me? And so then as they start to tell their story, it's a lens where we can take the pieces of their narrative and see how those things fit together, and then help them to understand why they might be reacting to life in the way that they're reacting, to relationships in the way that they're reacting, and why they're sometimes making choices that's not really what I wanted to do, but I seem to do it anyway. Where's that coming from? And so the humanistic perspective for me settles behind a guy by the name of Carl Rogers. And Dr. Rogers was someone who was originally trained in a Freudian model, which was basically all they had in the days of grad schools of the 1930s, 1940s. But he began to realize, wait a minute, people aren't getting better. And if they're getting better, it's glacial. There should be another answer. And so Dr. Rogers, in his own upbringing, saw how his own spiritual transformation took place at a certain point, not in the direction that his parents wanted him to go, but in the direction he realized he needed to go. And that a lot of it had to do with creating an environment for a client when they came in for counseling that was completely non-judgmental, right? That I am going to exhibit toward you what is called unconditional positive regard, right? And so Rogers said, look, even though I'm your counselor, you're a human being, I'm a human being, therefore there's equality. Don't perceive me as being above you or any kind of an expert, because you're the expert in your life. I need to learn from you. But in this setting, I'm going to value you and I'm not going to judge you. So, I mean, that's an important part of it. The other aspects are being able to connect to that person with a genuine empathy. Now, since the time of the bio, there's actually this really fascinating area that we can talk about later called interpersonal neurobiology, where
That's a mouthful.
our ability to have empathy with another human being happens because your brain becomes wired to my brain when we're in interaction.
I think Elon Musk is working on this. Not
who
the same
knows,
thing.
Who knows what he's working on? But just basically the idea that, to borrow a more modern phrase that the younger people use, man, I feel you, right? Well, okay, how does that actually work brain to brain? Well, it turns out that as you are experiencing emotion and you're communicating that to me, my brain knows exactly what you're feeling if we're connected and if I'm paying attention, right? So unconditional positive regard, accurate empathy with the other person, but then I'm just me. I'm just interested in being genuine. And according to Rogers, if those three conditions could be present in the counseling room, then they were necessary and sufficient conditions for that person to experience a corrective emotional reality, bringing them into, hey, I can be me and that's okay. Because unfortunately, Rogers said many people grow up with conditional positive regard. Hey, I'm your parent and I love you, but I'll love you more if you make these choices, if you do these things instead of things that I don't value. So children learn very quickly because they need the love, the security that implies. And so, I'll do what I need to do in order for you to adore me and to show me positive attention. And so over time, people learn to put on masks. In the different situations that we're in, I'll become what I need to become in order for you to like me. Instead of just, I am who I am, I need to be comfortable with that. And if you're not comfortable, well, that's not my issue. That's your issue, right?
Yeah.
So then the existential theory in counseling is basically, what are the things that are human universals, right? And one human universal is we will die. Someday, this physical body will go away. So if death is inevitable, what can I take out of that awareness to help me to find meaning and purpose in my current life? If I'm going to stop being here someday in this, will there be any kind of legacy? Will my having been here made a difference? Will it have meant anything? And so basically then the existentialists say it is normal to have an anxiety because of the demands of existence and living. And so I'm trying to remember which of the existential philosophers.
Yeah, I know this pop quiz.
Yeah,
Right.
There's a term it's spelled differently than it's pronounced. It's pronounced angst, A-N-G-S-T, and so to the English, it's angst, but they pronounce it a little bit differently. And so it's just this constant kind of internal disquiet that we may feel. Okay, but where do I find meaning in my life? And so there's another existential saying that I try to share with my students a lot because it's very important to my spiritual journey. The saying is, anyone who has a why to live for can endure anyhow, right? So if I know and I'm firmly rooted within myself to that there is a meaning in life, that there's the reason that we're all here is this, then it's not going to matter what storms rage around me. I will literally have an anchor and a rock to cling to, and I'll keep going, right? So anybody who has a why to live for can endure anyhow. Now, of course, being a Jesus follower, I have difficulty sometimes talking about some of the existential philosophers because they were very much, God is dead. That kind of stuff. But yet there were some Christian existentialists as well. So again, it's a fascinating area. And so those are just kind of like my two filters when I'm working with people, trying to understand them as human beings, and if I'm, needing to create kind of a therapeutic environment.
Sure. You were talking about Rogers, and for some reason the word listening comes up, and I don't know. My brain sometimes is, there's little bits of pieces, but is there something about how he talked about listening, or maybe I'm thinking about somebody else?
Yeah, no. You're exactly right. There was something that he talked about that's called active listening.
Okay.
Right? And so when I'm listening to someone tell their story, then occasionally I need to go, well, so what I heard you say is this. And it's not like, anybody can be a trained parrot. Oh, here, let me repeat the words that you just said. That doesn't let the person know that I'm hearing them, right? Because listening and hearing are two different things.
Right, yeah.
But if I'm capable of rephrasing that and capturing the essence of what they've just shared, then that connection is clear. Hey, he's really connected to me. He's really paying attention to what I'm saying. And sometimes, because what we say verbally isn't all of what we're saying,
Sure.
and there's deeper meaning. And so that's just kind of helping me make sure I'm staying on track, tracking with the client.
And sometimes words are chosen that may not be from a communication standpoint, noise happens between the sender and the receiver, and what I think I'm saying you may not be hearing. So it seems like it's important in that active listening to make sure that, okay, this is what I heard you say, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Both of which, both the idea of active listening and then that meaning. Meaning making, I guess, or finding meaning.
Right.
I think those two things really fit into the topic that we were, discussing, which is the spiritual journey. And one of the things that is setting up our discussion today, and we were having a conversation several months ago, and you pointed out, or actually you sent me a link to a podcast by John Eldredge, which was titled "The Deep Journey Within," or "The Deep Well Inside Us," I think it was the name of it.
Right.
And in it, he discussed sort of a process or a map of how to take that journey, how to get into that innermost part of us. And I wanted to follow up on that and sort of get your take on it after I'd listened to it. But he emphasized that connection that by doing this that you make with Christ, and also finding that sort of connection with God. Like this is part of that, a journey, and part of the reason for that. And so my I guess belief is that every one of us has to take a journey, a spiritual journey. And so I wanted to follow up on that and just get your take on that. And what does that journey, go into that deep well within us, what does it represent from your point of view?
Yeah, well, the world that we live in, this physical realm, is not God's total domain, right? We know in the story that there was a war in heaven before the events of Genesis were ever written. There was the beautiful angel, the one who, the glory of the morning, Lucifer, or some people call him Satan, the devil, right?
Who shall not be named.
Right, he shall not be named.
Throwing names around.
But he wanted the glory of the throne. He thought that he was a better God than God, and he rose up in rebellion, and he kind of got bounced, to borrow a phrase, right? So he's been given temporary dominion here, right? And we see that play out in different stories in the Bible, but he's clearly identified as the enemy, the accuser. And so the devil tries to keep us from realizing who we were created to be. We're described as being heirs in the kingdom with Christ our brother. And I mean, there's just so much that we could talk about with that. But where Eldridge tries to help people to kind of understand the choices that we can make is that we all have to survive. We all have to find a job. We have to find, relationships and different things. And so we get busy and there's stress. And of course, within the last couple of years, global stress with the pandemic and all of those different things. And so we feel a weight. We can be burned out by all the little disappointments and all of the different things. And instead of realizing what the Bible says, especially in Psalm 23, where it says, "And he refreshes or restores my soul," instead, what the world creates in us is the belief that, we can seek relief. We can seek little timeouts, and that could be in many different ways, right? Because the brain kind of will respond in the same way by releasing some neurochemicals to things that we perceive as being pleasurable, whether that's, hey, I'm just going to sit and veg and watch TV for a couple of hours. I'm going to go out and have some drinks, maybe too many drinks, eat too much food, all kinds of behaviors. And so it gives us temporary relief, but then we wake up the next day, we jump back into the matrix, right, without having been healed and restored, because that's part of what we're offered if we follow this journey. And so Eldridge and others are just simply trying to remind us, hey, every day we can have a choice. I can wake up and reorient myself and my connection to Jesus, to God, through the Trinity, and I can be very intentional about that to get my day started. And then as I go throughout the day, sure, I might get busy and distracted by doing different things, but do I create an intention to pause every so often and go, okay, Lord, I'm giving all of that to you for just a couple of minutes. I'm going to reconnect, because John talks an awful lot about the idea that we can have communion, an ongoing active relationship. And I would recommend to anybody, not just for a men's spiritual journey, but just healthy spiritual journey in general, to look at many of the books that he's written, because he talks about, hey, prayer, the Bible tells us about prayer. Well, God will actually respond. He will answer our prayers. But John also talks about, hey, there's a way that things are done in heaven. We need to learn what that way is, and if we follow in that way, then we can have some of the results that a David or a Paul or some of the others in the Bible, they heard from the Lord. Well, the Bible's not a book of exceptions.
He's exposing a process, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, again, just over the last few years, I've been just uncovering more and more about the availability of this life. And I've been on this journey for a long time. Felt like for a long time I was barely scratching the surface. But over the last couple of years, I've come across, again, more by Eldridge, but another gentleman that I've talked to you about, Dallas Willard, and how deep we can go in this journey, but we have to be committed to it. It has to be a priority, right?
Once a month is...
Yeah, because, and again, I don't want to cast any stones here, because, he without sin should be the first one to cast a stone, right? But it seems like a lot of the world these days is real comfortable with saying, I'm a Christian, without actually having a relationship with Christ. And why would you want to call yourself something without having the full benefits that Jesus offers us, right? And so again, it's something that you have to be intentional about realizing it's available, and realizing that you can do it. Now, it's an apprenticeship model, and that's one of the things I've really appreciated about Dallas Willard, is he lived this model out, and he's written some wonderful books. And so being able to understand some of the things that the scriptures have said to me over the years, where I've tried to overly complicate them, and Dallas is like, No, Jesus was being really clear about, hey, my peace I give to you. Oh, in this world you will have troubles, but rejoice, for I have overcome the world.
Right.
And so, all of these things that would seem mysterious and religious, and it's like, no, Jesus was just trying to help us live a life that he came to introduce, to model for us, and to show, hey, this is something that we can do, and it's worth going after.
Why do you think Eldridge used the deep well metaphor?
Well, Jesus talks about, if you come to me, you can have a water that never runs out, right? That I am a living water, and that anybody who drinks will never thirst again. And so just the image of God being a life giver, right? And so a deep well that never runs out, we'll be able to replenish ourselves. And then also John speaks a lot about the river of life. So in Revelation, when we get to the end of the story, and it talks about the new Jerusalem coming to earth, and that there is a river that runs through the city and runs out, and that we are to be planted on the banks of this river. Our roots will go deep, and we will bear fruit when we need to bear fruit, and there will be life, and that life flows from the life of God himself. And so it's just a very powerful metaphor to help us, because if you look at the world today, water scarcity, it's becoming a serious concern, right? And so I think a lot of people understand it's a very simple but powerful metaphor for life.
Yeah, as you point out, that's both a physical and a spiritual lack of water.
Right.
And
right.
I think the thing that, as I've looked at some of the things that you brought out, and even in my own, that water, that spirit, that it, and reviving us, it's there. It's always there, but we have to actually be intentional about going. And there's an idea in some practices about awareness is easy.
Right.
Awareness, that's not the difficult part. Enlightenment is the harder part, or getting to that point where that water's not just that you access it every once in a while, but it's accessible because on a daily basis. On a daily basis, we tend to get lost in all the things.
Right.
And so you mentioned a little bit about your own spiritual journey. Would you mind commenting a little bit on, what are some of the experiences that have really impacted you in your journey?
So I started out life as a pastor's kid. Right. So when I was born, my dad was a minister in the Southern Baptist Church. By the time I turned 7, he was leaving the church, and for reasons that I didn't understand at the time, that later just revealed to me that he was a man struggling with his own journey and his own decisions and those things, and so he left, an orthodox, organized religion, and went in the direction of what we would call New Age religion. Now, so then from age 7 through my teenage years, I wasn't attending church. I wasn't part of a community of believers, and we can say that I was sort of rebellious and mischievous, and the idea of karma, oh, you mean if I'm messing up and doing wrong things, I get to come back and do it all over again? Well, okay, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing, right? I mean, I really had no...
We'll call a mulligan this time.
Yeah,
next time
right.
I'll do better.
So there was no motivation for me to continually choose the right thing to do. Not simply because it was the right thing to do, but because by choosing the right thing, it brings me into harmony with the Lord and His purpose for my life. And so I didn't understand any of that at the time.
But that's an important distinction. And at a young age, even
Right.
teenager especially, with our, selfishness and,
Oh, sure.
narcissism. I mean,
Yeah, well, I mean, and kids are always egocentric. I mean, it's just part of a developmental process that we know about in psychology until we encounter enough resistance or feedback from the environment for us to realize, hey, my being selfish isn't good for my real needs, because as human beings, we have real needs for relationship. Right, and so, and again, a whole other conversation is, I teach my psychology students about we are, as human beings, we're biopsychosocial spiritual beings. Now, in my clinical training, we focused, of course, on the biopsychosocial, right? I'm a collection of biological systems. One of my biological systems is the brain, which gives rise to my psychology. But because I'm a body and I have systems that keep me moving and I have the ability to perceive the world, it gives me the ability to join the social realm, which is where, for human beings, if we're honest, that's where we find most of our meaning in our relationships. That's where we find the most enjoyment, the most fulfillment, and
sense of belonging.
right. And so, a barometer for mental health can be, as you do an assessment with somebody, hey, tell me about the friendships that you're hooked up to right now. Where, how active are you with friends? Do you do different things? And so the more active somebody usually is, probably the healthier in general they are. The fewer meaningful social connections, the more we might have a concern about a diagnosable issue, right? So just kind of a thing. So again, until we learn that it's in my best interest to look after your needs sometimes, not just my own, we don't grow up. And looking at the world around us, there are some people who haven't grown up, right? And they have fairly immature emotional intelligence. Narcissism is a thing. There's also this modern disorder that we call empathy deficit disorder, right? Where I don't care about anybody else but me. We're teaching a whole bunch of people to just be entitled to do their own thing, and I don't know why you're upset with me because I'm doing my own thing.
Right.
Once again, a whole other conversation. But so for me, growing up in my teenage years, small town in southern Indiana, I had some good friends. They were like siblings to me because I'm an only child. We ran together all the time, lived life together, right? Yeah. So high school, got into college, but then but began to have a sense that life was more than just partying, and working, right? And trying to get through school, because at that point I still didn't have any idea what I was going to do with my life. Psychology wasn't even on the radar screen yet. But then I started meeting some people. And at first I kind of thought, well, gee, these are interesting coincidences. Yeah. And looking back, I'm like, Lord, you've had my back the whole time. I get that. You've brought people across my path to help me to see some things, create some choices.
That, those coincidences are just God acting anonymously.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that phrase as well. And so, and it's easy when you're young and you don't have to be responsible for anybody for yourself to be very liberal in your views and very random in your behavior and irresponsible in all the things. But then as you realize, I need people to depend upon me. I need to become responsible. I need to become predictable for the most part. And I just began to realize that without a sense of spirituality and the meaning that we were talking about earlier, there wasn't a way to find a true north on my compass.
But is that meaning more than just the sense of responsibility? I mean,
well, at least for me, it became much more than a sense of responsibility, because the Lord meant something when He meant me. Yeah. And so in order for that journey to continue, I needed to look into what it was that He meant when He meant me. And so the only way to begin to discover that was to walk with Him and to try to learn from Him. And so starting to read the Bible became a very important part of my life. And I'm not a theologian. I may make some people, sign the sign of the cross at me when I say I've read all kinds of Bible translations, and they convey a sense of God's truth in slightly different ways. But I feel like over the years, as I've studied all of those translations and read them, the essence of God's truth, what He means for the world, what He wants for the world, is laid out very plainly. And we don't need a priest, we don't need theologians to interpret all of this stuff, because He reveals that within us through the Holy Spirit.
But it sounds like that meaning, and I might get this a little bit wrong, but essentially we're saying that he meant me to be me, right?
Right.
And so one of the things that I know in my experience too is that those masks you were talking about, and that can cloud even me understanding that what God means for me.
Right.
And so, what do you mean by that? Like, what do you really? I guess I want to better understand when you say that God meant me to be me. What is that? What do you?
Well, so when Jesus arrived on the scene, He said, "Repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand." Or slightly other places, He said, "The kingdom of God is near." Right? So, what is it here? Is it near? What does He mean? And so again,
It's close. Let's go with close.
And so I think He wanted to show us that the journey that was being taken through all of the Old Testament got a little complicated, right? Because God started out by trying to give us 10 simple rules, and we messed it up, right? Turned it into volumes and volumes of rules. See, I knew that was going to happen. I was going to break something.
That's all right. They're good at editing, believe me.
Yeah. Okay, there we go. The cord got
If we need
caught.
to, we can go into deep fake mode.
Right. So, because in the Old Testament, He gave us 10 simple rules, and then we overly complicated it. And we felt that, hey, if I'm perfect, then I'm right with God. And of course, that's crazy, because no human being can be perfect. It's never happened. So what then Jesus came to show us was that, okay, look, there's a different rhythm in life. There's a different way to understand what God intended for you all to experience, because all God wanted at the outset was just a relationship, right? He created this paradise. And so another part of the story. But Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek." Blessed, and all of those things, because He wanted people to see you don't have to be somebody special to be loved and to be adored by God. God has a plan for His creation, and each and every one of you is meant to have a part of that. And so each of us are born with certain aptitudes and abilities that if we awaken to that relationship with the Lord, we realize, oh, I'm supposed to use this to help bring the kingdom to this reality called the earth. Because when He taught His disciples to pray, right? Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be Thy name. Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Well, of course, God is capable of, okay, my will, it's done. Forcing everybody to do it. But that's not His intention. His desire is for us to love Him and adore Him and to walk with Him and to be His intimate allies, which that's another Eldridge phrase, His intimate allies in bringing the kingdom. Now, of course, I can't make any other human being do anything, right? That's why marriage and family therapists are in business, because couples, right? Fix my husband, fix my wife, all the things. No, I have responsibility for me. But this process of becoming who I'm truly meant to be takes time. And it can be complicated because unfortunately we get hurt early in life sometimes through our experiences, whether it's inadequate nurturing in our families of origin, or we form attachments to other friends, the first love and all of those things, and then we get hurt. Well, each time we sustain a hurt, why? Why? Oh, there must be something bad about me. There must be something I'm unworthy. I mean, all of these lies and distortions that we can accept. But Jesus just says, look, come to me and I'll show you who you are meant to be. You are my beloved. You don't need to be anything other than who I've created you to be. And so walk with me and I'll help you discover that. And so again, as we do that, and as we walk deeper in that journey with Him, we have the ability then to be with other human beings, non-judgmentally, right? Totally accepting. And as people begin to experience that, and again, back to the interpersonal neurobiology thing, we can, just by being healthier people than some of the people that we might walk with, but if we demonstrate unconditional love for them and acceptance and non-valuing, that allows a healing and a transformation literally to happen in neural circuits that reduces anxiety, depression, shame, guilt, other negative things that we shouldn't be experiencing, and allows that person to become a healthier person in the kingdom. And so love, again, just kind of being the central attribute and trait of all of that, leads us to be what Jesus intended for the world. And this is God's great plan. He simply intends for evil in the world to be overcome by the transformation of every human heart. And I can only do mine.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that jumped out to me as you were speaking, and one of those was the idea of the difference or the juxtaposition of perfection versus potential.
Right.
You know, the idea that, and the thing about potential, with perfection, there seems to be a value associated with it. Like, okay, you're 100%, or you're 99, you're a pretty good person, but that one, there's still that. With potential, there is no value. I mean, there's no like quantitative, because potential is, we can't really quantify it.
Right.
You know, and looking at from as you were speaking, I just had this sense that by looking at that potential and letting you know, the Christ Spirit in you and connecting with that, you can, I mean, the potential is really what matters. Not that you're 100% of the time,
right,
but you know, connecting with that potential. And I don't know if that's what you meant, but that's what I was. That came to me as you were speaking.
Well, I mean, and I think that captures an essence of what Jesus came to share with us, because that day in that synagogue in Nazareth where he stood up and he said, hey, hand me the scroll of Isaiah. And he read out of Isaiah 61, you know, the Spirit of the Lord is on me. I have come to bring healing or binding up of the brokenhearted, to make the captives free. Think about the homeless in our world that we have today. What level of self-esteem do many of them possibly have for themselves? Because, well, look at me. Here I am, I'm living on the street and all of the things, but yet every single one of those human beings is loved just as much and valued just as much by Christ as anybody else. A president, CEO, whatever it is, we're all even. And unfortunately, human beings, out of our insecurities, oh, look at me, I'm your boss, you know, I can make you do all of these things, and that makes me your superior. And no, it doesn't. It just makes you my boss.
Right.
Right? And in terms of this company, I just simply need to be obedient and do what it is that you need me to do to make the company a success. But from a larger point of view, the spiritual journey is we want to make the world a success because we're all part of the same family. We're not in different tribes, despite how many different ways people try to find ways to, oh, your skin color's different, you grew up in a different country, you believe differently. Yeah, no, that's not the way it's supposed to go. And so again, genuine disciples of Christ, somebody who realizes that following the way that Jesus says that we should live is important, they'll rearrange their lives to make that possible. They realize this is the only important goal. Yes, I've got to work. Yes, I've got to be in relationships, but while I'm doing those things, I'm being a Christ follower.
That meaning, though, meaning then of life takes on a different context.
Right.
It's not meaning of how much I've gained, how the things that I have, the people that I have around me. It becomes, at least the way that I'm sensing it, is that meaning takes on a whole different realm, a spiritual realm, that supersedes all of it. And that sort of meaning, to have meaning in my life because I have a good job, and we all know how fast anything that we have can go away, including life.
Sure.
But to find yourself, I'm not sure that could be that meaning, to find the person that God intended us to be. That seems like a very different level of meaning, and one that's very worthy of pursuing. And so what advice would you give anyone who might be listening and thinking, you know what, I go to church, I'm on a spiritual journey,
Right.
but they're not feeling
Right.
that, and they're not sensing that there's meaning on, or just someone sitting there going, what's this Christ thing? Like, where would you, what advice would you give in terms of starting a spiritual journey?
Yeah. Well, I think the most important thing will be to seek Jesus. Now, there's many different denominations, there's many different places where you can go to church, and I think being part of a spiritual fellowship is a very important part of this, because anybody who sets out to do this on their own, right? Because in America, we have this John Wayne spirit, right? I can do all of these things. But the beauty of having a shepherd who watches over his flock is that, as the Bible says, he'll leave the 99 to search for the one. Why? Because the one is more easily taken out. If there are wolves watching the movement of the flock and that one wanders away, he's lunch or dinner or whatever, right? Yeah. And so being together with people who can encourage you and where you can kind of share your questions and, have conversations and see other people and their journeys. Now, of course, the best thing that I could recommend, while there are any number of publishers of good Christian books that are out there, you could actually waste more time, I think, pursuing all of those different books, and they're ways to Christian peace, ways to effective prayer, all of these different checklist kinds of things. And it's like, wait, let me just go back to spend time in the Bible. Let me just see what God says and how He says it. What are His instructions and His encouragement to me? What are His promises? And use that as your primary support book, your guidebook, the manual for living, right? Because, it's all laid out there. And again, in the New Testament anyway, most of it is really pretty clear and self-evident after you've read through it a few times. And it's just, okay, let's not read for speed. because that's definitely not going to be a good thing. But, okay, Lord, I'm going to dwell in a particular passage for this week. Let me read it every single day. Lord, I'm going to pray for you to reveal in me what you mean for me by this passage. How does this illuminate the path for my life? Because one of the things that I have noticed, I am primarily more of an introvert than I am an extrovert, even though I stand in front of large groups of people and talk about psychology. So I kind of have to put on my game face when I come in to teach. But it's easy to do when you have a passion for what you're teaching, right? But over the last couple of years with the pandemic, I have had this fantastic opportunity to spend so much more time in the Bible. And it has just, in some ways, like, people talk about, oh, you've understood something and the light bulb goes off. Oh, as I've read the Bible over the past couple of years, there's been fireworks. I mean, just a full-on display where, Lord, how many times have I read this in the past and I'm only just now getting what this says? And in the midst of all of the trauma and the chaos, the death, the illness, and all of the things that have been happening in the pandemic, the thing that has stood out to me more than anything about what Jesus offers to me is peace and an assurance that I am safe. And so Dallas Willard has a line. He says, if I believe what Jesus is telling me, then I know that the universe is a perfectly safe place to be. Yeah. While I'm not going to ever relish trying to get physical pain to happen to me, because when my physical body dies, that may be part of the scenario, but my soul, the truest and deepest part about me that stands in the presence of God all the time, can't touch that. Yeah. I'm good. And so the more I have spent time with the Lord in His Word, and the more I have read that and seen the consistent truth, the more I'm finally understanding that when Jesus says, be at peace and fear not, these aren't mere suggestions. He's actually commanding us, but He's commanding us to do something that He's made possible. Yeah. Through His work and what He has accomplished. And so again, I just, it's kind of like a good steak. When you start tasting it, your mouth starts watering and you're like, man, I just want to devour this steak. Well, the Bible has become like that for me. It's just, I want to keep devouring. I want to keep reading. And now, I have to be very intentional about not watching a lot of news, reading headlines, all of the craziness of the world, because I can't do anything about that. Right. What I can do something about is trying to grow deeper in my spiritual journey.
What kind of, for some, as you were talking, one of the things that occurred to me is how much courage it takes for somebody to walk into something like this, to say, even to themselves, and admit there's something, I don't understand it, but I want to start this journey. I want to put my walk forward into, let's just say, the spiritual journey. Mm-hmm. In today's God is dead culture,
right?
How difficult do you think that is? I mean,
well, it is. It does require a great deal of courage, because that biopsychosocial thing, we learn early on that if we behave as other people are behaving, if we perceive these people as having some level of credibility or value that's beyond ourselves, well, I'll get value if I belong to this group. Yeah. Right? So I'll start doing some things that maybe internally I disagree with, but my need to belong is strong. And that's because God created us to belong to Him, right? But we have to figure that out. Now, firmly place yourself on this path, you're going to have to be prepared for a lot of people to look at you strangely and to sometimes even, you're crazy. How can you believe that stuff? Well, at least for me, what I have to keep coming back to is that when I start getting caught up in what the world says is important, I'm not at peace. I don't feel a deep sense of belonging and security like I do when I'm spending time with the
Could
Lord.
there be an insincerity about people who want you to be part of the, you're part of the group, and even though they may be seemingly for your well-being, dude, you don't waste your time, all of that.
Right.
But part of that's about them too, wanting to control or wanting to, and maybe in some cases really shut out the fact that they might be feeling it as well.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and again, we live in a world where there are a lot of unknowns. There are a lot of things that are beyond our control. And so human beings don't function well in chaos. I mean, in order to get out of bed every day and to get dressed and to come to work and to do the things, we need to know that we're going to be relatively safe. If the world was completely chaotic and unsafe, I think most people would just stay in bed, pull the covers up over their heads, curl up in a fetal position, and just hope to get through that day.
Or just distract themselves with all the things.
Sure, right. And so again, there's a, when you started, we were talking about communication, and you said there's noise, that sometimes and nothing is really being said. Well, the world is really good at creating a lot of attractive noise and things that appeal to us because, again, as biological creatures, God designed us to experience pleasure in some very specific ways. But the enemy is just as crafty, right? I mean, that's how he's described in Genesis 3. Right? He was the subtlest or the craftiest of all of the animals in the garden. And so he knows how we're wired. And so there's all kinds of things that appeal to us that activate the brain very, very powerfully, but they're temporary and false things, right? And so, but a lot of people dedicate their entire lives to chasing the false things because they think the next one is finally going to be it. Yeah. I'll finally find that right person. I'll finally, all of the different things.
Yeah.
And so we're constantly chasing, but then who's taking care of my soul while all that's going on?
Right.
It's not being nurtured. It's not being
Well,
grown.
that's a view of hell, is to go through life constantly chasing something in search of a pleasure that might be, even if you find something, is still momentary.
Right.
And isn't that deep-seated sense of belonging to the divine,
Right.
being connected to the divine. A couple of last questions. One of them.
You mean we have to stop talking?
No, we don't at all. That y'all just leave the cameras running, and we'll. In terms of, we do live in an age of social media and, from a podcast to YouTube how-tos and all of the things. Mm-hmm. One of the issues may be, okay, I'm not ready to go to church, right? I mean, I'm starting. I feel this even since a little kid. I've had this sense of the divine. There's something spiritual and okay, I'll read the Bible. And it's kind of difficult, some of the stories are, it's a literary device. It's a storytelling device that holds with it, the deep, sacred, esoterical stuff, right?
Yeah.
But can we find community? I mean, a lot of us see this social age as, mostly bad. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, talking or at least listening to someone like Eldridge, or even maybe someone more age appropriate, or not age appropriate, but closer to my own age and understanding, that seems like it might be helpful in terms of building your own. Okay, I took that. It's like martial arts, right? You go in and you're the white belt, and you don't. But then there's always someone who's just that rank above you that you get to interact with
and learn from.
And learn from. What do you? I mean, how do you see social media maybe being able to play a part in that?
Well, and again, I think.
Or not at all. It's okay if I disagree.
Well, again, we're social creatures, and we need to connect meaningfully to other people, and we need to have a sense that there are people who have our backs and will have theirs, right? And whatever that means, but just sort of the sense of a shared journey and doing life together. That is the good stuff,
that
Thomas,
you're not alone.
That I have begun to realize that, because when you're young, you look at the older people and then they're like driving this car and they live in that house. And of course, these days they have that phone and all of the other things, right? And so you think, I've arrived if I'm up to that level. I've earned these things, right? And so it's a symbol of my success. But I've learned that what makes a person a success is that they are deeply connected to other human beings in relationship. Now, of course, in high school, I thought that meant 200 other people, right? Because you would see them every day in school. Hey, what's up? You doing all right? All the different things. But those were acquaintances. Those weren't genuine relationships. And so over time, the older you get, the smaller that circle becomes. But the quality of it, right? And so, the difference between bronze and gold, right? I mean, and other metaphors that you can find for valuable substances. And so the good stuff in life is knowing that you have those connections and that you're not alone. Now, of course, in the spiritual journey, we know we're never alone, because Jesus said, I will never leave you or forsake you, right? And so while we have that relationship, God knew that we would need each other. So what has been happening culturally in America over the last couple of decades is that once huge churches, they're losing members. Why? Is the message any different? Well, no, they're leaving because they've realized that what they're looking for isn't always found in church. Because again, different denominations and different churches, hey, to follow Jesus, believe our way, right? It becomes about choosing and being baptized into the right denomination and, all of the different things when, Jesus never said anything about that in the Bible. That's not what
he kind of took his own path.
Right. And so the fastest growing group of people who are following Jesus are classified as the nuns, the people who have no church affiliation, yet people are creating small groups. They're creating home churches, if you will, people who are just simply doing life together. And it's not just, hey, come over just for a game night or for dinner, but come over and we're going to fellowship. It may involve the breaking of bread. It may involve having some fun, but we'll talk about Jesus. And we're all in this shared journey together. And you don't have to be at the same place that I am, any of those things, but just this sense we're all moving in the same direction because it's worth something. It's the most important thing.
This won't be a great metaphor. I was going to use geese, but maybe not. Magnetism. Let's try that one. Because earlier you had mentioned that how, as you started realizing there was more, and you started looking towards like being intentional about your journey.
Right, right.
You know, you had been on a journey before, and you, if like me, you knew you were on a spiritual journey, but you weren't paying that much attention to it. But then there comes a time.
Right.
But once you were intentional, it sounded like people came in that were almost like a magnet being drawn to whether it was to help you or to encourage you or even just to, hey, I'm having those same sort of questions, and I think that knowing and trusting the process can be really important. So I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah, totally.
So
Totally, because again, Psalm 23 is just a central thing that I read on a regular basis and meditate on. And you think about the Good Shepherd who, he gives us everything that we need, right? These calm, deep green pastures, the deep waters, right? His rod and his staff. Nobody's going to mess with me because the Lord is with me. He refreshes, he restores my soul. He leads me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Another way to say that is he helps me know how to make the right decisions because that's what he wants for me, right? And so that's part of his blessing. And then it talks about he prepares a banquet before me in the presence of my enemies. Now, it starts out by saying, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want or I shall not lack, because God is a God of unimaginable abundance. I mean, infinite abundance. And he gives out of that just because it delights him to do that. And if we ask, we will receive. I mean, Jesus tells us that, right? But here's the crazy thing about a spiritual path of life that I think is truly what Jesus wants us to do. If he's going to prepare a banquet for me in the presence of my enemies, well, enemies, come eat with me because this is more than I need. This is an abundance. And I mean, and elsewhere in the New Testament, Jesus is really clear, hey, don't just like your friends, love your enemies too. And so if God is going to provide all of this goodness, what's it for? Shouldn't we be connecting instead of disconnecting?
Yeah.
Shouldn't we be joining and including instead of excluding, right? So how, at this point in my life, in my journey, that's what I'm focusing on more than anything else, because it's really easy to disagree with people over things, and my hypocrisy can run really deep when people are doing wrong things, and it's easy for me to see it.
Right.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
What about this guy? And so it's like, I just have to stop judging people. Yeah, for some reason you may think you're my enemies, but I don't want you to be my enemies. So let's break bread together. How can we solve problems
That goes
together?
back to that honor thing that you were talking about
Yeah,
earlier.
to respect and honor, because the imago Dei, right? The image of the Creator that's in every single human being that's ever been, it's undiminished. All through the years. I mean, there's 7 billion people on the planet, something like that. Every single one of them created in the image of God. He loves every one of them equally. How can I do any less? Now,
And he wants everyone to find meaning.
yeah. Now, liking people sometimes can be the challenge.
Sure.
But, we're
Liking
supposed to love.
ourselves sometimes
Right.
can be a challenge. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. And so again, just spending time with the Lord and understanding that he has a sense of humor, right? I mean, there are some things that I will be doing throughout the day, and it's just like, okay, Lord, I goofed it again, but you're laughing with me. Thank you, Lord. You're not dumping me just because I'm still a goofball, right? Knucklehead. And so just seeing all around us every single day the beauty that God places before us just because he delights in doing that, but also because he heals and he restores through beauty. I mean, there's just so much the more that I have grown in this journey. Because, I mean, early on, it was really easy. Oh, hey, it's Sunday. Going to go to church. Monday, I'm kind of doing my thing.
Yeah.
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Oh, Sunday, I'm back in church. Well, I think the Lord wanted a little bit more out of this relationship than just a one-day-a-week thing. Okay, so Lord, I'll wake up on Monday and I'll start with some time with you. And so another John, to read some very interesting things. I think we've talked about him before, but there's a John Ortberg, a guy who is a pastor and a psychologist. He spent a lot of time with Dallas Willard while Dallas was still alive. They became good friends. Dallas was a mentor to John. And John wrote a book that's been very powerful to me. It's called Soul Keeping, caring for the most important part of you. And in the book, John talks about how he was working with Dallas and talking with Dallas, and it's like, Dallas, I want to be deeper spiritually. I want to, grow, right, in my spirituality. And he's like, so Dallas, I just need you to know every morning I spend 15 minutes. I've got a quiet time that I spend with the Lord. He said, Dallas paused and he said, that's great, but what about the other 23 hours and 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Are you spending that with the Lord? And he then went on to tell John, you should arrange for your days to be an unbroken experience of communion with the Lord and doing all of the things that you're doing, but just knowing and having the sense that the presence of the Lord never leaves me. I get distracted and I don't see him, but he's always with me.
Yeah.
And so it's up to me to be able to remember that and to know that, and again, the masks and the belongingness, that the issues that we have with human beings, and I need to be this in order to be accepted. Jesus reminds me I don't have to be anything except, again, who he's created me to be, and to just have that trust in him that even though others might, for whatever reasons, shun me or disconnect me, he never will.
Right.
And so with that power behind me, how can I not have peace? Yeah. Now again, I'm still not quite to that 24/7 experience, but getting to this point has been fun, challenging, rewarding, worth it. Yeah. And so again, as a psychologist, trying to help students understand what can psychology do in the world. People need to be healed, don't they? Yeah. Don't we need to reach a hand down to help people when they need help? Well, let's do psychology with Jesus and help people. Yeah. And it's exciting every single day to come to work.
To sum up, where you feel like you found meaning is what I heard.
Yeah, absolutely.
One last question. How do you think artificial intelligence is going to change the spiritual journey or impact it? Or even how we understand ourselves? I'm sure psychology is going to have some say pretty soon in what it means to be sentient.
Yeah. There's still so much about AI that I'm really not sure about, but as human beings, we have the ability to be deeply contemplative and to become aware of our own thinking, and even, okay, Lord, I'm upset right now. Come into that emotion. Help me to understand why I'm upset. What is it that I'm responding to? Is it, again, something inside of me that is some sort of false agreement that I've made with the enemy? Does it come from some wound that I've not yet brought to you for healing? And so, the ability for us to linger in our own thinking and to become aware of that, But then to emerge out of that into a greater awareness is a joy and an opportunity that we can do. So will artificial intelligence ever mirror something like that? I mean, I don't know. I know that computer programs can be written and it's like, oh, here's this thought, so it loops to this thought, which then can loop to these two. So, I mean, there's a complexity there, but will it ever equal the marvel of the mind that God has given us? I don't think it can. Yeah. I mean, it can mimic.
Well, then let me ask you in a different context,
Okay.
or maybe with an example. Humanoid. I'll use cyborg. Maybe that. Well, the cyborgs in relationship to humans. How do you think that, from a spiritual, from a Christian standpoint, that might play out, and in particular from an idea that robots are already largely used to replace labor, be it white collar or blue collar.
Right.
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 And we're already interfacing human to computer interaction through our phones and our home systems and all of the things. So the idea that a humanoid, a cyborg, could look very similar to us, have even express some emotion, even laugh at one of our jokes. What do you? I mean, but there's also the idea of throwaway. So, and this is not new. In human history, humans have been seen as less than humans.
Right.
But here we are on the verge of creating a whole new being, really,
Right.
because we're insistent upon playing God.
Yeah.
We can't help ourselves, it seems.
Yeah. Well,
so there's a psychological component to that, I'm guessing, and a spiritual component.
And so, so in this same book, the Soul Care book that I just mentioned, Dallas told John that in order to understand something, you need to know something about its parts, right? And so whether it's a Beagle or a BMW, they have parts. And in order for that thing to work as well as it can and for us to interact with it, we need to understand the parts. So for human beings, we have parts, right? And so we have a will, right, which would be a desire to do something. And so he uses the example of, hey, molten chocolate cake, right? Human beings have to be able to make a decision. Do I have just one piece of molten chocolate cake, or do I have two, right? Because the will isn't,
or none in my case.
Yeah, you know.
I get
so
your point, though.
The will leads us to make choices, but we also have thoughts, we have feelings, ideas, and so I think with artificial intelligence, you can create a being that basically kind of functions with some of those parts. But the one thing where AI will always be deficient is there's never going to be a soul. And so in terms of AI being able to pursue a true and a deep spirituality, it's not going to happen because we're creating it instead of God creating us as full beings that include a soul, you know, and so there will always be that slight difference for AI. Just my thoughts.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
And, a pleasure as always talking with you.
Outstanding. Thanks for letting me bring my coffee.
Absolutely. Well, I know how much that means to you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Help Me Understand with Dr. Thomas Jeffrey. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on the notification. And again, thank you for joining us.